intention of the words speaks louder than the words themselves. And then we know. We don't have to actually listen to the words, we know. That's when we come from truth, the capital T. Then we never need to worry or think about being lied to because it can't happen. We see through it all. Okay, just want to get that off my chest. um, there is so much to talk about um, as regards those sorts of things. There is a interesting struggle going on, and I want to get to this one more news-oriented kind of thing before we start talking about the mystical experience, which is what I promised for this episode and a few episodes to come, and definitely I'm going to get into it. But I wanted to talk a little bit about, well, the Arab Spring in particular, but in general, about the transition era that I spoke about and did many, many shows about over the past year or so. Um, and for those of you who didn't hear or missed them, I spoke about this being a transition era in which uh, rapid changes in social, political, and economic structure um, were taking place. And that ultimately, uh, the biggest change was a change in consciousness, a broadening or expansiveness of consciousness. Uh, so, this being spring, and I guess it's the seventh anniversary of the Arab Spring, which is something I talked a lot about in relation to the transition era that we're living in. There's been a lot of talk about the death of the Arab Spring and the coming of the Arab Winter, if you will, and that's because, well, let's go back and just talk about what Arab Spring is. The Arab Spring was a series of protests and demonstrations across the Middle East uh, and into North Africa too. That started in 2010, in March of 2010, I believe. No, actually, it was later than that. The first protests, okay, occurred in Tunisia in December of 2010. So I was wrong about that, but that began a uh, wave of unrest throughout Algeria and Jordan and Egypt and Yemen. And it consisted of organized demonstrations, protests, and rulers being forced from power. By February of 2012, Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, Yemen, all had had civil uprisings, all had had leaders forced from power. Um, and it spread to Bahrain and Syria and Algeria and Iraq and Jordan and Kuwait and Sudan. And what were these protests about? Well, these protests were about wanting freedom. They were about wanting democracy. They were about standing up for against repressive regimes and standing up for the rights and civil liberties and the basic humanity of people. Now, the reason people start thinking about the death of the Arab Spring is that many of the changes that took place particularly politically, uh, in reforming governments that needed to be reformed, either didn't take or left a uh, vacuum, if you will, that began to be filled by fanatical terrorist types, and particularly in Egypt, I think many people who saw the changes that happened in Egypt, uh, saw the end of Mubarak and his repressive regime, have been disillusioned because of what is happening now. Mohamed Morsi, uh, who was the first democratically elected president, uh, lasted only about a year. Morsi was sworn in on 2012. Not even a year. Okay, so by July of 2013, the military came in and overthrew this new government that was just forming and removed Morsi from power. Uh, Libya also failed to have a successful transition yet, although they did get rid of Gaddafi and got then involved in a civil war. And Yemen, of course, you hear about Yemen still in the news with the Islamic State attempting to take over and plunging them into civil war. Same thing with Syria. Also in civil war. So, much of the analysis is that the Arab winter has arrived and the Arab Spring is dead. However, I just want to say that, when I spoke about the transition era, I made very clear that this transition era was not going to be, in many cases, a clear path. That it was going to be back and forth. Then you had these two uh, energies vying with each other, represented astrologically by Uranus, which is the planet of revolution and change and freedom and independence and innovation, and the planet Pluto, which is of many other things, uh, the the planet of power and the desire for power and obsessiveness and repressiveness. But interestingly enough, Pluto is also the planet of transformation. Its kind of transformation is not revolution, though. Its transformation is via death and rebirth. So, in other words, while Pluto's transformative power is one of, I guess you might call it scorched earth, where things are completely wiped out to make way for the new. Uh, the Uranus change is through through acts, through commitment, through idealistic beliefs, if you will. So when those two work together, things go much more smoothly. When those two are at odds with each other, although they are still making the changes, it looks like there's a battle going on. It looks like one step forward, two steps back. But it's the process of change that has to go through in order for the change to be solid. And so, yes, there's been a pullback in some of these countries. There's been a blowback. But I'm going to read to you, there's a wonderful article in Huffington Post about why the Arab Spring is not dead, and I will get to that in a second. But also, just to let you know that although some of these countries involved um, have plunged themselves into civil war, some of them did not. And, well, particularly here is a reference from Wikipedia about it. The presence of a strong, educated middle class has been noted as a correlate to the success of the Arab Spring in different countries. Countries with strong welfare programs and a weak middle class, such as Saudi Arabia and Jordan, as well as countries with great economic disparity and an impoverished working class like Yemen and Libya and Morocco, did not experience successful revolutions. The strength of the middle class is, in turn, directly connected to the existing political, economic, and educational institutions in a country, and the middle class itself may be considered an informal institution. In very broad terms, this may be reframed in terms of human development. So, there in the countries that were successful in the Arab Spring, and there were those, it was because you had uh, a strong middle class and an educated group of young people who wanted change, but were not struggling, if you will. They want change, but they have a feeling or an understanding that it can happen. And they are coming less from a place of despair, if that makes any sense. Uh, Youth across the region continue to struggle with the more personal fight to build an economic future as they enter adulthood. And for many young people, the struggle has only become more acute in the difficult environment faced by many of the countries in the region. Uh, Finding real solutions to the economic constraints that shape the transition to adulthood in the Middle East remain as vital today as before the Arab uprisings. And indeed, finding such solutions is perhaps the linchpin for bringing stability back to the Middle East. Uh, so there's an article in the HuffPost by Somaya Ganushi uh, where she states why she says that the Arab Spring is not dead. And I'm just going to read the last paragraph of this because I think it sums it up pretty well. So, what is left of the Arab Spring today? Physically, it is Tunisia, but that is not all that remains. The profound sense of entitlement to freedom and dignity and shared consciousness of injustice and humiliation, which had triggered the great movement of mass protest and rebellion around the Arab world, is still very much there. Rather than the collapse of the Arab Spring, what we are witnessing today is the retreat of its first wave, and with a catastrophic reality and a deepening feeling of humiliation and despair, the likelihood is that higher, stronger, and more encompassing waves are yet to come. are yet to come. And that's where consciousness comes in. And that's why it's about consciousness. It's about an awareness, awakening. And when awareness awakens, well, you can never be entirely sure how its path will take. And you can't have deadlines and expectations on when that happens, and you can't throw your hands up and say it was a failure when it doesn't happen the way you expect it to. So that's just something I wanted to reference, as I've had lots of people talk to me, send me emails, and so on about